Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HUD OCIO Learning Session. I'm Dr. Melanie Cohen. Today, we're going to be discussing enhancing leader effectiveness in organizations. And what we'll be doing is discussing a model of leadership and offer practical guidelines for becoming a more effective leader. We're very fortunate to have with us today Dr. Sim Sitkin of Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. Hi, Sim.
Hi, Melanie.
Let me introduce our panel, tell you a little bit about Sim, and then we'll begin our discussion. Today's panel includes Stan Boo from HUD's Office of the Chief Information Officer, Gabrielle Williams, also from HUD's Office of the Chief Information Officer, and Robert Nolan from HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing. Thank you all for being here with us today. Sim Sitkin is Professor of Management, Director of the Behavioral Science and Policy Center, and Faculty Director of the Fuqua Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics at Duke University. His research, teaching, and consulting focuses on the effect of formal and informal organizational control systems and leadership on risk-taking, accountability, trust, learning, change, and innovation. Sim is currently editor of Behavioral Science and Policy and of the Academy of Management Annals. He is a fellow of the Academy of Management and of the Society for Organization Behavior. His most recent books are Organizational Control, Leadership, and Rutledge Companion to Trust, which is forthcoming. So Sim, I'm going to turn this over to you to get started, and then we'll begin our discussion and conversation. Again, thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Melanie, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And what I'd like to start us off with is by asking those who are on the panel and those who are watching to think about their own experience for just a moment so that they can refer back to that as I talk about the framework that we've developed to understand and to enhance the practice of leadership. If each individual watching can think about 2 or 3 adjectives or phrases that describe a good leader that they have known. In fact, can we move to the slide that shows that text? Now think of 2 or 3 adjectives that describe a bad leader that you have known. As I review the approach that we've taken, the research-based approach to understanding leadership, I'd like you to reflect on how the framework that I talk about applies to your experience of what made for good leaders or bad leaders in your own work history or in other activities that you were involved with. Next slide, please. What I'd like us to do is to start with a couple of observations or principles that guide what we've done as we've looked at leadership. The first thing is that we actually did not go, when we first developed this model, to the leadership literature because we felt that the leadership literature was actually not very strong. There were pockets of strength in that literature, but a lot of the research was not very practically useful that had been done well. And a lot of the writing about leadership that was aimed at enhancing practice was in fact not really based on very good research. And we felt that this was too important a problem to allow for that. So the first thing that we did, though, was to distinguish leadership from some other concepts that it's often confused with. Leadership fundamentally is different from management and different from authority. Authority is about a person's hierarchical position, the amount of power and control and the formal title they have. And if you just think about people who are in very high-level positions or people who are in fairly low-level positions in your organizational experience, sometimes those high-level people are not very effective leaders. They may not be very effective managers. They may have been promoted because of technical competence or because of political connections. Those are different kinds of things. Management, as opposed to authority, is about designing and executing systems to get things done. In contrast with that, leadership is about exercising influence over others in the pursuit of a goal. It does not require a formal position of authority. Sometimes those who are effective leaders are actually not very good at the managerial part of their task, just as some people who are extremely effective managers are actually kind of weak at various aspects of leadership. They're not different people, though. They're different roles. And most of us occupy both managerial responsibilities as well as leadership responsibilities, often in addition to our responsibilities as technical experts. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of things I'd like to highlight before I get into the details of the model. One is leadership, as opposed to management, requires a personal relationship, a personal connection between the leader and the follower. As opposed to management, where many of us have been told it's not about you, it's not personal, it's about the task, it's about the objectives, it's about the technical criteria, which I think is true for management. For leadership, who the leader is and who the follower is really does matter, and establishing that connection is critical to effective leadership. Next slide, please. Another point I want to make before getting into the model is that our conception of leadership is not that it is just top-down, which is the way it's often talked about. One does not only, go back to the definition of exercising influence over others, one does not only exercise influence over one's subordinates. You also exercise influence over your boss. If you work for me, I want you to come to me with your expertise, your experience, your best judgment, and influence me to think about things a little differently than I would have otherwise. Similarly, if you're running one department or team and I'm running another team, we may be interacting with each other. I need you to help me see things more clearly when it relates to your area of expertise. You need to exercise leadership not only down, but up, laterally, and out toward customers, both inside the organization and outside the organization. Next slide, please. Okay, so this sets us up to look at the framework that we developed to try to understand what leadership is. And our approach is different from a number of others. It's not unique, but it is different in that some approaches to leadership focus on leader traits, things like charisma and a variety of other things. Ours does not do that because you can't change your traits. For example, some research has shown you're going to be seen as more of a leader if you're taller. Well, you can't get taller just because someone tells you that. However, we focus on leader behaviors because you can change your behavior. You can learn to exhibit more effective behavior if you understand what's required. As we went into the literature, what we identified was there were 6 distinct clusters of behaviors that effective leaders exhibited that were associated with 6 distinct effects. 6 clusters of behaviors that you can see in this triangular, we call it a pyramid, framework, are ones that each are highly related to each other, but they have distinct effects. The bottom 3, personal, relational, and contextual leadership, are what we refer to as the foundation element. My suggestion, by the way, is go to the next slide, and I will talk through very briefly what these 6, what we call domains of leadership are, and then I will later go into a little more detail on each one of them. As we walk across the bottom of this pyramid, personal leadership is about the importance of conveying to those you're trying to exercise influence over something about yourself. What are your beliefs? What are your values? What are your competencies? Who are you as an individual? Do they have a sense of who you are as a person and as a professional? And that's essential if you're going to be able to lead them. The second, relational leadership, is about connecting with them as a person and a professional. Do you convey to them that you actually understand them, that you care about them, that you respect them, and that you're going to treat them fairly? So in the first case, personal leadership is about you as the leader. Relational leadership is about your link to them as the follower. The third foundation element, contextual leadership, is essentially about sense-making, the role of the leader in helping to make sense of the environment in which we're operating. Why does the organization work the way it does? What is our general strategy? How do the pieces fit together? What is our identity as an organization, and how does that link to the identity of the individual that you're trying to lead? We call these foundational, and we worked very hard, by the way, to make this intuitive and to make it simple and straightforward. If you think about the three foundation elements, it's not complicated. It's very sensible. Personal leadership is about the leader. Relational leadership is about the follower. Contextual leadership is about the situation. The foundation of leadership is leaders conveying who they are and why anybody should follow them, how they link to and care about the people that they're leading, and how they can help people really understand in a much simpler, more straightforward way what the context is that we're operating in. By the way, as an aside, every organization that we have worked with, and we've done this in a variety of industries, public and private sector organizations, different levels of the organization, and in countries around the world, contextual leadership is virtually universally rated as the weakest part of leadership that's exhibited. It's not complicated, but it's just not done. Now, if we move up to the second level, in terms of inspirational and supportive leadership, inspirational leadership is about engaging in behaviors that will get people to see that things are possible that they didn't necessarily think were possible. Providing reason for optimism that we can accomplish great things. Encouraging people to believe that it matters to try to strive to achieve more challenging goals. If we move to supportive leadership, that's about providing people with the resources that they need in order to achieve those great things, giving them a realistic sense of what their capabilities are, what the capabilities of the group are, providing them with the necessary political protection that they might need in order to accomplish the things that they're striving for. Finally, if you look at responsible leadership, and each of these relate to each other in ways I'll explain more later, responsible leadership is about accepting responsibility for the whole. Accepting responsibility as a leader, that it's not just, if it's not my job, it's not my problem. It's if I see a problem, if I see a way I or my unit can help solve that problem, I have a responsibility to take that on. Am I conveying to those I'm leading that I feel that mantle of responsibility? Am I conveying to those that I'm leading that I set and live by high ethical standards? Those are essential, because if you go to the next slide about leadership consequences, this is the end of my introduction and overview. Each of these 6 domains of leader behavior have very distinct consequences. The effect of personal leadership is you have credibility with those you're leading. The effect of relational leadership is that they trust you. The effect of contextual leadership is you're able to forge a shared sense of community. The effect of inspirational leadership, by the way, is not that they think you're cool. The effect is that they raise their own aspirations to try to achieve more. The effect of supportive leadership is not that they feel safe, secure, and don't try to do things, but instead they have a very good sense and a willingness to take initiative when it's appropriate and to ask permission when that's appropriate. Finally, responsible leadership creates an environment in which those you're leading feel a real sense of stewardship, of ownership of the whole. That's the overview, and I want to just show you a couple of data points, and then I can start to either take questions or delve into each of these in more detail. If we go to the next slide of illustrating the range of effects, we just recently collected some data that is, I think, illustrative of the kind of data that we've seen in a variety of contexts, but this is relatively new, which is why I wanted to share it with you. This happened to be looking at the effect of physicians in terms of their impact on the staff that work in their health organizations, and also their effect on their patients. So in a government context, this relates to what kind of effect can you have on your staff, and also what kind of effect can you have on the American public, the citizens that you're trying to have an impact on. If we go to the next slide on physician leadership impact on staff, these are just 3 illustrations of, and you can see, while the degree of impact is a little different for each of these 3 exhibits, it shows that there is a very clear impact of leader behaviors on whether staff assume more responsibility, on whether staff strive for improvement, and whether they're willing to take more initiative. All of these are the exact kinds of issues that I've seen play out in public sector leadership requirements. If we go to the next slide on leadership, physician leadership effect on patients, you can also see that when physicians exhibit stronger leadership behaviors, patients comply with prescription and treatment recommendations, they are more satisfied, and they come back, they are retained by that physician. And finally, their attitude toward their health care and their likely outcomes is they become more optimistic. They have a much more positive outcome. In public sector services, all of these are very relevant. We want people to comply with what we're asking them to do. We want them to come back and feel more satisfied with government services. And we want them to have a very positive attitude and be optimistic that in their interaction with the public sector leaders, that they can actually accomplish more. All of these factors apply from the various highest levels of the public sector to frontline employees who are trying as professionals to exercise leadership over those who they view as their customers, over their peers that they work with, and the teams that they may be leading. Why don't I stop there, Melanie, and we can open this up for questions or discussion.
Okay, that's terrific, because I think we'll have a couple of questions. So let me just kind of kick it off. So I love the model because I think that it is so relevant to actual practitioners in the workforce. That's what I really love about it. So the question I raised, though, and we can start talking about it a little bit, because I know you're going to get into the details of each of the different pieces of the pyramid, but I've seen pieces of each of those in different people and different organizations, but I've never really seen all of those things together in anyone in an organization where they actually all come together so you have an optimal organization. Because I think what you describe is really optimal. And most organizations are not like that.
Yeah. I think it's a great question. And so there are a couple of things. One is there are some individuals, very unusual, but there are some individuals who are great at all of these dimensions. Mm-hmm. It happens pretty rarely. One example, I happened to get to work with the Duke men's basketball coach, Mike Krzyzewski. He actually is strong in all 6 of these areas, but he's known as an excellent leader, and I think it's precisely for that reason. But I think you're right. The rest of us, mere mortals, we have our Achilles heels. There are areas of these 6 domains where we may really be outstanding. There are other areas which are really weak for us. And then there's some that are in the middle. The key is there are two aspects to how to address this issue. One is, one reason we need leadership teams is because just as we can't be strong in all elements of leadership, our organizations are complex because we deal with a lot of complex technical knowledge too. Mm-hmm. None of us can be expert in all of the aspects of technical knowledge. Right. It's very unlikely we're going to be outstanding in all of the domains of leadership. However, we can get better at the areas that we're weak in. But it's also fine to say, that area, I'm never going to be really strong in inspiring other people, let's say. But I work with somebody who is really great at that. And by the way, it can be the number 1 in a team that's great at that. It can be the number 2 in the team that's great at that. The key is, as a leadership team, Do you fulfill the needs of the organization to get this covered? The second aspect of that, to answer your question, is not every situation requires excellence in all 6 domains. There are some situations which are inherently inspiring. You don't have to be especially inspiring in that circumstance. The situation takes care of it, right? You may be working in an organization, although this may be more of a hypothetical for many government organizations, that in and of itself is very supportive of the people working in the organization. Some organizations are really very family-like and are very good at providing realistic feedback and making people feel safe and willing to take risky initiatives when it's appropriate. Other organizations are not at all like that. If your organization is not like that, but you need your people to take initiative, you have to be strong at supportive leadership. If the situation takes care of that, it's not as critical that you personally exhibit that. Now, that said, there are certain elements that everybody needs to become strong at if they're not. And in particular, I would argue that the relational and the responsible elements of leadership are essential more universally. And if you think about the negative of this, it becomes clear why that's the case. Imagine that I'm trying to lead a group, and I say, well, they don't really have to trust me. My assistant director can be the one that they trust. That's not very plausible. If I'm going to lead people, they need to be able to trust me. Similarly, if you go up to responsible leadership, imagine that I say, I don't have to really exhibit balance or ethics. I've delegated that. That's not credible either, right? So what you do need to do as a leader is connect with people well enough so that they can trust you and exhibit enough responsible leadership so that people can see you're balanced, you own your job, and you're going to be ethical. The other parts can be subdivided, and you don't have to be strong at all of them.
Okay. I think, I don't want to monopolize it. I see some other people on our panel have some questions, so go ahead, Stan.
Stan Boo. Question, I think you had mentioned that the contextual component is often the weakest, just generally the weakest, and not often done. So I guess my question is, with the impact and the effect on community, why is that? Why is that such a challenge for leaders?
It's a great question, and let me just say that it's actually even more strong than to say it's often a problem, because we've done this with tens of thousands of individuals in these wide variety of and I can think of only 2 cases where it was not the lowest, and in those 2 cases, it was probably not statistically different from the lowest. It was the second lowest, and it was very close. I think there's several reasons I think that it's low. One is that a lot of times leaders actually know too much. And so they just assume everybody else knows what they know, and they don't have to explain things. And the way I like to frame that is, if you've got a group of very sophisticated, very experienced people that you're leading, what it means is contextual leadership doesn't mean you talk down to them and you repeat to them things that they know very well. Instead, you may be able to provide that kind of explanation briefly, simply. You don't have to belabor it necessarily, but you still have to supply it. And in fact, kind of ironically, the more expertise those you're leading have, the more it may be important for you as a leader to provide that very simple, directed guidance, because of their expertise, they can think of 3 or 4 options. You have one option in mind, and you're thinking that option is just obvious. They really know all the details and can think of a variety of ways of approaching it, and it doesn't take long for you to just say, we have options A, B, C, and D. This time we're doing B, and here's why. And in 2 sentences, you've done an effective job of contextual leadership. They've got it. They can run off and do what they need to do. Whereas if you're dealing with a rookie, it might require a whole chapter worth of explanation. So one reason I think we don't do it is we know too much and we assume everybody else knows it. The second reason is because we may be leading people we have a lot of respect for, and we're afraid we're going to be, in a sense, talking down to them if we provide an explanation, rather than recognizing they still need one, it just can be brief. And the third reason is, especially in highly politicized environments, but I've also seen this in highly technical environments, there is almost an assumption, and it's a dysfunctional assumption, that if I have to explain this to you, maybe you're not as good as I thought you were. And in fact, if that's the environment that we're in, and in highly technical environments, that is often the assumption. I hired you because of your expertise. I shouldn't have to explain anything to you. Now, in that environment, if you do need a little more clarification, maybe even a lot more clarification, you would do anything you can to avoid asking the question, because we're in an environment where if you ask a question, then people are going to say, oh, well, he's not as good as I thought he was. So as a result, the leader doesn't provide the explanation. The follower doesn't make it clear to the leader they need more explanation. And as a result, all of this sense-making doesn't happen when our data seem to suggest people desperately need the explanation. They need to understand why we're doing things the way we are, what our strategy is. And by the way, even if it hasn't changed, there's a headline in the newspaper. There's a new report of some, executive order that came out of the White House, or that Congress is considering something. We need to know that we're staying the course. So sometimes that contextual leadership is explaining a change. Sometimes it's explaining why, no, we're sticking with exactly what we've been doing before, and here's why we're doing that, notwithstanding the environmental changes that we're hearing about.
So just a follow-up question, if I may. The hierarchical nature of the pyramid kind of implies that you build upon each level, so you have the foundational components. So when I get to the top of the pyramid responsible, I'm assuming that to fully mature that component, I need to have the 5 components below.
Okay, yes, sort of. By the way, I like to joke with people that if you have a lucky number, I can find a leadership framework that has a number of dimensions that's your favorite. It's that random in the literature. Ours isn't random because it really came out of our analysis of the research literature. But you're right, there are others that have 6 dimensions. There are others that are in the shape of a triangle. Ours is a little different in that each of the elements is placed in that pyramid where it is for a very particular reason. And just as an illustration, so you're right that they do build on each other, and the ones that are next to each other are either mutually reinforcing or mutually eroding. So if you're good at personal, you're very strong technically, have clear beliefs and so forth, but you're weak at relational, that relational weakness begins to erode your credibility, as an example. So they're not random next to each other. If you're trying to provide contextual leadership, to your last question, and you've got weak relational leadership, you don't really understand your people, it's going to be much harder for you to provide effective contextual leadership than if you're stronger at relational leadership and you understand your people. Now, in terms of building up, let's take as an example inspirational leadership. It's very hard to be seen as an effective inspirational leader if you're weak at personal and relational, in the sense that if you're trying to inspire me, you're asking me to take a risk, open myself up to trying something aspirational, open myself up to disappointment if it doesn't work out. Am I likely to take that risk if you don't have credibility with me? You may be conveying to me we should be optimistic about this goal, that it's a really important goal, but if I don't think you know what you're talking about, one of the analogies I like to use is Inspirational leadership is about providing a vision, but the difference between a vision and a hallucination is competence. Anybody can have visions. They're called hallucinations. But if you don't have that underpinning of credibility, that I believe you know what you're talking about, you have experience and so forth, I'm not going to take that vision seriously. Similarly, you could be incredibly expert, but if I don't think you understand me or care about me, you could be setting me up by asking me to take a risk on behalf of you or the organization. If it works well, maybe you'll take the credit. If it doesn't work well, I'll be gone. So the underpinnings, so if you look at this entire model, and you go up the pyramid, each piece below is an important component of setting the foundation for those that above. The ones next to each other actually are interlocked in a variety of ways. Now, that said, just like you could have a building, an edifice, and you still are able to have doors and windows in it without the building collapsing, you need to have the structures in the right place for that building to stay standing. Similarly, with the pyramid, there can be weaknesses, and it still can work. But you're right that those foundation elements, and as you build up, if you have weaknesses down there, a lot of times you can be perceived as an ineffective leader, or even if you're exhibiting all the right behaviors, it won't have the right effect if the underpinnings are weaker.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything before we get going with Sim again?
We'll go back to the beginning. I was really very pleasantly surprised to see that you bifurcated management and leadership. In doing that, my experience in the military immediately came to mind, where it's assumed that you're a leader and you're a manager. Well, oftentimes it was you have the authority to have or to order somebody to get something done. How do you actually when you're working with a client? How do you actually work with a client to bifurcate that so that they understand that just because you have the authority doesn't mean that you're an effective leader?
Well, we do that empirically. So we have a 360 survey that is based on this model. So we're talking about the model in terms of these 6 buckets of behavior, but as we get into more of the details, you'll see underneath each of those there are what we call subdomains, and then underneath the subdomains there are specific behaviors. And so, first of all, my experience is that while this model is based on the research, people find it very intuitive, and they find that it does relate to their own experience and practice, and often people are kind of aware of their own weaknesses, and if they're not, getting that empirical feedback can be a shock sometimes, but it is a constructive one in that there's a pathway out of the woods, essentially. And so what we have found is if you get people to reflect back on their own experience with either in their own leadership or other leaders they've worked with, it's very rare that someone has not seen someone in a position of authority who is not a great leader, right? It's also pretty rare that someone doesn't remember working with someone who had no authority, who everybody really respected and turned to and was very influential. Now, sometimes those people then rise up through the ranks, and it's an early signal, but not always. I haven't found it. Your reaction is a more common one that I've seen, that it's great to separate out and recognize that authority is not the same as leadership, and management is not the same as leadership. And for people to not have to feel defensive about that. There are people who are great at exercising influence over others. They're not the ones you would want doing the systematic planning or designing the systems or, running or even managing the execution. And then there are other people who are great at the execution, but they're not the ones who are going to rally the troops. And for people to get permission to say, and to not feel ashamed about, I'm really good at X, I'm not so good at Y, can we buddy up? Because together, and if you think about the military example, organizations that know how to manage this well don't do it randomly. It's very common in the military that a new junior officer will have a very seasoned sergeant, let's say, assigned to them to make sure that maybe they have leadership ability, but they don't know how to make things work very well yet. They have a seasoned person who's protecting them. In medical settings, you may have an inexperienced surgeon being paired with a team in the operating room of very experienced nurses who make sure that that surgeon doesn't make any mistake. Mm-hmm. And I think, so as a result, I think having a framework to talk about what is usually this feel-good, fuzzy stuff, but having a very systematic framework allows people, and one that doesn't say either it's black or white, either you're a good leader or you're a bad leader, that allows you to say, I'm good at X and not good at Y, frees people up to acknowledge it more and then be able to work on the elements that they're not as strong at.
Thank you.
So, Sim, I'm going to turn it back to you to begin to go through pieces of the model.
Okay. Then why don't we go to the first slide on personal leadership. And for each of these domains, I've got what I would consider kind of a couple of cute quotes that illustrate the point. And in some ways, the quotations capture an important element, and in some ways, they capture the idea that most of our treatment of leadership is really pretty fluffy. And the idea behind this model is to make it much more grounded in a systematic framework that is rooted in research and that gives you more guidance than simply this very sort of glib, vague stuff. But I do like, for example, the Lencioni quotation is not a bad heuristic, even though it doesn't provide you with a lot of guidance. That if you've let people know who you are and why they should follow you, it's often not thought of, but if they can do a pretty good imitation of you, that's usually a sign of both affection, but they also know you and your quirks. And that's not bad. Let's go to the next slide. So what are the dimensions of personal leadership? And I've kind of alluded to them. The first one is to convey to those that you're leading what the basis of your competence is. That you actually do know what you're doing. This is where, now this is hard for a lot of people to do because they interpret it as bragging. And the goal here is not to talk about how wonderful you are, but to recognize that if you're going to walk in and take over a new team or lead a new organization, now in today's world, this may be a little less critical in some cases because they will have vetted you online before you walk through the door. 20, 30 years ago, that wasn't true. But today, that is true. But it's still useful as you walk through to recognize, I have to convey in my own frame what are the experiences that I bring to bear? What are the competencies I bring to bear? And then so that they should be willing to follow me. And by the way, this is especially important as one moves up through the ranks. You begin to lead people who have expertise that exceeds your own. Often in the beginning, you become a leader over a group of people where you're put in that position simply because you know more than they do or you have more experience than they have in the area that you all are expert in. As you move up, you become more of a general manager and a general leader, and some of the people you're leading know way more than you do about the topics at hand. So the question then is, what is your competence that makes you merit being our leader? And conveying that. The second piece is giving them a sense of who you are as a person. This does not mean they need to become your best friend. They don't want to know all the intimate details of your life, but they have to have a sense that you are a real person, that you're not just an automaton. And this makes a lot of people, for some people this is a natural, for others this makes them very uncomfortable. If you come up through technical fields, you're actually told it's not about you. People don't have to have a sense of who you are. It's about your data, essentially. It's about the technical facts. But personal leadership does suggest they need to know your capabilities, but they also need to have a sense of who you are. And then finally, they have to have a sense that you're not in this for your own advancement and political agenda, that you're dedicated to the mission and you're dedicated to the team. Now, by the way, authenticity combined with this notion of dedication doesn't mean that you shouldn't be ambitious. It's fine, but be authentic. You know, my goal is to run the agency someday. You know, I think I'm capable of doing that, or my goal is, you know, to do this and then to go off and do something else. But while I'm here because I believe in the mission, I'm dedicated, I'm committed to the mission, and I would like to go to you and ask for your help in giving me the experiences, supporting me in the things I'm trying to do long term. So being dedicated and being ambitious is not inconsistent with being authentic. You can really be transparent about that. Let's go to the next slide on relational leadership. And I'm going to keep moving through these unless someone interrupts and asks a question. But feel free to do that at any point. So relational leadership, these two quotations kind of illustrate the sort of glib, general, but on target kind of thing that I was talking about. I especially like the Johnson quotation here in the sense that the essence of relational leadership, because he only got part of it right, I think. The essence of relational leadership is really listening and deeply listening to those that you're trying to lead, to really understand them and connect with them. However, the part I think he got wrong is that they will not intuit that you understand them unless you actually do a little bit of talking. So let's go to the next slide, because what's interesting is, just as I said there was a generalization about contextual leadership in terms of its weakness, relational leadership, there is a generalization in that this is the domain in which our self-assessment and others' assessment of us is the most disconnected. For example, this is also one of the domains where there is a gender difference. There isn't a gender difference in most of the domains. But in this domain, men tend to over-assess how good they are at relational leadership, and women tend to under-assess how good they are at relational leadership. In my experience, most men are surprised at that, and women think it's kind of obvious. But I think the issue is that it's not that men actually don't do some of these things, that as leaders, that men aren't concerned about those they're leading, that men do not understand those they're leading, that men do not strive to show respect for or be fair toward those that they're leading. I don't think the problem is that men as leaders aren't trying to do those things. I think the key issue, or that men don't think those are important, I think the key issue is men less than women actually communicate those things. They may be doing it, but they're not conveying it. And just as with personal leadership, it's not enough to be competent and to be authentic. It's also important that you project that and convey that to others. Similarly, for relational leadership, it's important that you let others know, I understand you. If I don't understand you, I'll listen and explain it more, and then I'll get it. That I actually am thinking about your career prospects, your welfare, how you're balancing your life issues, that I'm actually thinking about what's the best way to be fair, which being fair, by the way, does not mean giving in to what they're asking for. It does not mean you're a pushover. It means you're explaining why it is that not giving them what they've asked for is actually more fair than giving it to them would have been in some cases. But the idea here is that if you want to be trusted, how likely am I to trust you if I don't think you understand me, know my strengths, weaknesses, understand what I care about? If you don't respect me, if you don't care about my welfare, that you're just using me, and if I don't believe you're going to treat me fairly, why would I trust you? Those are kind of pretty straightforward. Okay, let's go to the next one with contextual leadership.
Sim, before you move on to the next one,
okay.
I'm beginning to think about, and maybe the panel's also thinking about it, you were talking about how one bleeds into the next.
Yes.
And so I'm beginning to think about the trust issue under relational, because oftentimes when an organization is not particularly effective or leadership's not effective, it's because the trust is fractured in some way,
Yes.
right? And so the reason the trust, I mean, in my experience and from what I've read, the reason the trust is fractured is because the leader is, and I use leader loosely. I don't mean
Right.
but in this term, I'm using it at the top of the pyramid. Okay.
You know, as someone in authority.
Right, right. So the leader is inauthentic.
Right.
Right, because there could be an ego, or it could be self-interest, or it could be a variety of things. Okay,
Yep.
so now I'm beginning to see actually how one thing can bleed to the next.
Right,
So,
and in fact, we studied that explicitly, and let me just give you one example, that if you look at the trust literature, and that's one of the areas I've done a lot of research in, that personal, relational, and contextual leadership in that literature historically have all been framed as having direct effects on trust. And you can find that if you look at them independently. When we put them all together, what we found is that most of the effect of things like perceived competence on trust worked its way through the relational. So being seen as less competent affected how I perceived you as a relational leader, and that in turn affected the trust that I had. If I saw you as less dedicated, that affected how I perceived your concern for me, and that in turn affected the trust. Now, there was still some direct effect. So if you look at this, I would argue, by the way, if you ever see a leadership set of studies that does not have high correlations among the elements, you should be suspicious of it. Because except in a laboratory where you can control things so that they're not correlated, in the world, we tend to create halo effects or see people as really evil or as really heroes. And so all of the elements of leadership tend to start becoming correlated over time. But what we found is when you carefully control for those things, there are these distinct effects. But as you were suggesting, if you're exhibiting bad relational leadership, it's going to bleed over and then affect credibility. If you're exhibiting bad personal leadership, it's going to bleed over and affect trust, mostly through the other sets of behaviors.
Right.
I'm going to perceive your other behaviors differently.
right, right, exactly. I don't know if anybody else has anything, or we'll just let Sim go on to the next piece of the pyramid, perhaps. Why don't we do that, Sim? Go on to the next piece of the
Okay,
pyramid.
and I'm going to truncate this, and because I know we're running short on time, so I'll do it very briefly.
Okay.
But contextual leadership, if we go to the slide that has the 4 bullet points, there are several elements to how do you do this sense making. So one thing is helping people know what to focus on and prioritize, which is a pretty obvious and familiar one. A second element of contextual leadership is we live in a very complex world. It's changing rapidly. It's getting more complex. There's high levels of interdependence. Helping people simplify their understanding of what it is we're doing, our strategy, how our organization works. Going to the second bullet, do the people you're leading have a coherent picture, almost like if you go to a new city and you don't know your way around, and suddenly you have a coherent sense of how the city fits together. Do they have a coherent sense of how the organization works? In most organizations, the answer is no. And to me, that's a lack of leadership. That's a lack of contextual leadership. And the last piece is, especially when we have high levels of professional identity, we may not have high levels of organizational identity. So an individual may have a real strong, in fact, I was working with one federal agency a few years ago where people had a very strong sense of the mission and the identity of the agency as a whole. but they didn't have that with their particular units within the agency. And I've seen it work the other way, where there's a very strong sense of professional identity, but not a strong sense of how that identity links to the organization as a whole. Contextual leadership is about clarifying the umbrella identity, the sub-identities, and connecting that with each individual. Because how can we really be a diverse community if we don't understand how that diversity works for all of us and how we fit in, even though we're not a cookie cutter like everybody else in the organization? Okay, if we go to inspirational leadership, I'm actually going to skip over the slides with the quotations just in the service of time here. Let's go to the slide that has the bullet points. Inspirational leadership is actually perhaps the most familiar to us, and it's about establishing an expectation of excellence and innovation. It's not management by objectives. It's the expectation that I expect you to do excellent things. I expect you to innovate, because if we're really going to try to do great things, we're going to hit stumbles and we're going to have to be creative. What I want to comment for a moment on is this second bullet point having to do with enthusiasm and optimism. And there are two things I want to highlight. Enthusiasm is not becoming a rah-rah cheerleader. It's very specific. It's why is the goal we're trying to accomplish, the mission we're pursuing, important and worth being enthusiastic about. So it's not just the leader being excited. It's not about hyperventilating. It's about communicating the substantive reason for enthusiasm. The second is optimism, and you can see why optimism would rest, as I said before, on the competence associated with personal leadership, is it's not only, and we've all heard this, someone saying, oh, I know you can do this, or I know we can accomplish this. That's optimism, but that's kind of vacuous optimism. Optimism that is substantive here is optimism that says, I believe you can accomplish this because, do you remember these 3 projects that were so tough that you accomplished? I know you can do it. And the idea here is to get people to really be willing to raise their aspirations. Okay, let's skip the quotation about supportive leadership and go to the bullet points on that. And there are 4 bullet points here. On supportive leadership, it's giving people a realistic sense of what they are and are not capable of, and what the team that is around them is or is not capable of. So even if they're the star on the team, they don't feel like they have to do everything because they have a sense of how they can rely on other people. Some people underestimate their capabilities. Some people overestimate their capabilities. This is getting them to be realistic. In the research literature, it goes under the word efficacy and a sense of self-efficacy. But the key here is just a realistic sense of my capabilities. The second part of leadership is making sure that if people are going to strive for something, that you're there to help them get the resources they need. And part of that includes promoting a culture, an environment in which people feel a personal sense of accountability if they haven't accomplished something, but they're not worried about being blamed. Now, in a lot of public sector organizations, this is a tough thing to try to accomplish. In today's publicity frenzy world, it's a tough thing sometimes to accomplish. But the idea is if people are looking over their shoulder at whether they're going to be blamed, they're not keeping their eye on the task. They're not striving to they're not willing to take that initiative. They're waiting for someone else to do it. If I know you've got my back, if I do my best and it just happens not to work out, that I'm going to be covered, I'm more willing to take initiative when I should. And by the way, the other thing is if you put these elements together, you're not creating wild cowboys who are taking on things they shouldn't take on. Having that realistic sense also allows people to say, I could do this, but I think this might have broader ramifications for the organization. I need to either ask permission or I need to just coordinate with other people so I don't screw up what they're doing inadvertently. So supportive leadership leads people to take appropriate initiative. The last of the 6 domains, and again, let's skip the quotations here and go right to the bullets, is I talked a little bit before about being a role model for ethical action. I think that's pretty straightforward. I also talked a little bit before about the notion of the leader demonstrating that they own responsibility more than just their narrowly defined mandate. In some ways, we're all in silos, but the question is, can we accept responsibility for how our silo connects with other parts of the broader organization to serve the client, to achieve the mission? Accepting that responsibility is part of what responsible leadership is about, and encouraging balanced action. We have multiple constituencies and stakeholders we're trying to serve. We're trying to accomplish short-term goals, but also not undermine the long-term at the same time. Responsible leadership is about creating balance as well as the ethical and responsible pieces. And the goal of this is not for people to look at the leader as a saint. The goal is for those you're leading to feel that ownership, to accept that sense of stewardship of the whole. When I talk to senior executives in the private sector as well as in government, stewardship is one of the things I've been hearing over the past few years, over and over again. How do we inculcate a sense of stewardship in those we're leading? Because then they're going to own it. They're going to do the best thing that they can. And responsible leadership is important in pulling all of these elements together to really create people who are our followers who feel that sense of stewardship.
So Sim, I can hardly believe that our hour's over, just about. So I don't want to cut you off, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to. Because we could talk, I think, for another hour about this, because there were so many questions, and I unfortunately had to sort of ask our panel not to interrupt you. So first, let me thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate it. I think we all got a lot out of this conversation. So I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. I want to thank our audience for taking the time also to be with us, our panel members, and for the great questions. And for everyone else who's watching, I want to thank you for being with us. And please join us again next month for the HUD OCIO Learning Session. So have a wonderful day.